All right, so today we're diving into something pretty powerful, a YouTube video actually, and it's all about this community in South Africa called Bonteheuwel. And it's really about like life under apartheid, but told through personal stories, you know?
Yeah, it's not just dates and names and all that. It's about like this really deep emotional core, like the hopes that people had and how they kind of got dashed, in the fight for freedom and equality, and how those experiences still shape the community today. It's pretty amazing.
Wow, so like real lived experience. Okay, so to even start unpacking this, we need to talk about apartheid itself, and specifically this thing called forced removals. Can you set the scene for us? What was going on there?
Absolutely. So imagine this, right? You're living your life, and suddenly the government comes in and says, nope, you gotta move.
That's right.
You're being uprooted from your home, your community, your whole life, basically. And that's exactly what happened to so many families under apartheid. This law, the Group Areas Act of 1950, gave the government the power to decide where different racial groups could live, and it was devastating.
So it wasn't just about like keeping people separate. It was about taking away their homes, their livelihoods, everything.
Right, and it wasn't just a few families here and there. We're talking entire communities.
Yeah.
Like District 6, for example, which was this vibrant, multiracial community in Cape Town, it was completely demolished.
Just wiped off the map.
Yeah, and families from there and other places were sent to these newly created townships, like Bonteheuwel, Elsie's River, Mitchell's Plain, and these places were often far from the city centers, which meant limited job opportunities. It was a deliberate strategy to disrupt their lives and control them.
And this is where the guy in the video, Rashad, comes in, right?
Yeah.
His family was one of those affected by these forced removal.
Exactly. He talks about how his family ended up in Bonteheuwel and the struggles they faced just trying to get by, trying to survive.
Yeah.
His mom had to travel really far just to find work. And his dad, he ended up selling fruits and vegetables on the street to make ends meet.
Just to put food on the table. Can you imagine the stress? The uncertainty, having to rebuild your whole life in a new place, far from everyone and everything you know.
It was incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And for Rashad, who was a young boy at the time,
Yeah.
it really shaped how he saw the world. Think about it, growing up surrounded by this constant struggle, this feeling of injustice.
Yeah, I bet it would make you question everything, especially those in power. Were there any figures like leaders or activists who gave people hope during this time?
There were, and Rashad talks about two in particular, Anton Franch and Ashley Creel. They became incredibly important to the colored community in Bonteheuwel. They were seen as heroes, voices for the voiceless. And they really inspired a lot of young people, including Rashad, to believe that things could change.
Okay, so what made these guys so special? Like, what did they do that earned them that kind of trust and admiration from the community?
Well, both of them were active in the struggle against apartheid, and they weren't afraid to challenge the system. Franch, he was more of a community leader. He organized protests and rallies, spoke out against the injustices that the colored community faced. And then you have Creel, who actually joined the armed wing of the ANC. He became a symbol of resistance against the government.
So, two different approaches to fighting for freedom. Franch focused on, like, mobilizing the community, advocating for change peacefully, while Creel felt he had to take up arms, but both resonated with the people.
Right, and I think that speaks to how complex the struggle against apartheid really was. There wasn't just one way to fight for liberation. People found different paths, different ways to resist and demand their rights. But at the heart of it all, there was this deep, deep desire for freedom, and this belief that the African National Congress, the ANC, would be the ones to bring about the change they needed.
And then, of course, in 1994, you have this huge turning point. Nelson Mandela is released from prison. South Africa holds its first democratic elections. That must felt like a brand new world.
Oh, absolutely. And you can hear it in Rashad's voice when he talks about this time. There's this palpable excitement, this anticipation, the end of apartheid, this promise of a new South Africa built on equality and justice. It felt like a dream come true for so many people.
To finally see the light at the end of the tunnel after all those years of oppression, did that optimism, that feeling of hope, did it spread through the whole community?
It did, at least initially. There was this collective feeling of relief, like the worst was finally over. But as we'll see, that initial euphoria, it eventually gave way to a much more complicated reality.
Okay, so 1994, this huge moment of change. But you said things got complicated. What happened?
Well, here's the thing, right? Political freedom didn't magically erase all the inequality that apartheid had created. And that's where this feeling of betrayal comes in. It's something Rashad talks about a lot in the video.
Betrayal. By the ANC, the very people they fought alongside.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy stuff. So the ANC, they're in power now. And they have this massive task ahead of them, creating a just society after decades of apartheid. But in the process, they end up incorporating many of the existing laws into the new constitution. Laws that still disadvantage people of color.
Hold on, so the laws used to oppress people during apartheid, they just became part of the new South Africa.
It's complicated. They needed to create some kind of stable legal framework for the new government, right? But that meant compromises. And for many people, especially in communities like Bonteheuwel, it felt like the revolution hadn't really delivered on its promises.
And to make matters worse, their heroes, like French and Creel, they didn't even get to see the new South Africa.
It's true. They sacrificed so much in the fight against apartheid, and it's like their contributions were forgotten as the country moved forward.
It almost feels like they were fighting for something more than just the end of apartheid, like a real shift in power, a dismantling of the whole system that had oppressed them for so long.
You got it, and that's why Rashad's words are so powerful. He says, 2024 is our 1994.
Wow. Like a call to action, a call to finish what was started.
Exactly. And it's not just about big ideas. It's about the real problems that communities like Bonteheuwel still face. Poverty, unemployment, lack of opportunities, and feeling ignored by those in power.
And this is where the National Colored Congress comes in, right? The NCC.
Right. They're a grassroots organization working specifically in colored communities, trying to address these issues head on.
So they're picking up where others left off, trying to make good on the promises of 1994.
Yeah, you could say that. They're working on making communities safer, advocating for better housing and education, creating economic opportunities, and they're pushing for more political representation, holding elected officials accountable.
It sounds like they're tackling things from all angles. But Rashad also talks about this one guy, Angus Mackenzie, the local councillor.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back. He's really critical of Mackenzie, says he doesn't actually represent the community's interests.
It's like this disconnect between those in power and the people they're supposed to serve. Rashad makes it sound like Mackenzie is all talk, no action. Making promises but not delivering, especially on basic stuff like fixing the roads or addressing the violence.
And that leads to disillusionment.
Right.
People lose faith in the system. They start to think their voices don't matter.
But even with all that, there's still a sense of hope in the video, isn't there? Like Rashad and the NCC are saying, we're not going to wait for someone else to fix this. We're going to do it ourselves.
Definitely. There's this real sense of agency in what Rashad says. He even quotes, "We will die because we are their voice."
Powerful stuff. A huge weight of responsibility, but also this incredible determination to fight for their community.
It goes beyond politics, you know. It's about taking control of your own destiny, fighting for a future where everyone has a chance.
So we've gone from the hope of 1994 to this much more complex reality, where the fight for true equality continues.
And we've seen how personal experiences, like Rashad's, can shed light on these larger societal issues and inspire action.
But it's not just about South Africa, is it? These themes of broken promises, power imbalances, the struggle for representation, it feels much bigger than that.
Absolutely. And I think this deep dive brings up some important questions for all of us. Like, what does it actually mean for a community to have its voice heard? And who gets to decide which voices matter?
Yeah, it really makes you think, like, whose voices are we hearing, whose stories are being told, and who's being left out of the conversation?
Exactly. And I think what's so powerful about Rashad is that he's not just talking about the problems. He's actually doing something about it. You know, he's part of this movement, this organization trying to make things better.
It's inspiring, but it's got to be tough, right? Going up against these systems of power, trying to change people's minds.
Oh, I'm sure it is. But there's this resilience, this hope that shines through, you know. People like Rashad haven't given up.
It reminds me of this thing I read about the power of small actions. Like, even tiny acts of resistance can have a big impact over time. Have you ever come across that idea?
All the time. Anthropologists, sociologists, they've been studying this for years. Change doesn't always happen in these big dramatic moments. Sometimes it's about planting seeds, having tough conversations, challenging the status quo in your own little corner of the world.
And maybe those small acts of courage inspire others to do the same.
Absolutely. It's like a chain reaction, you know. One person's bravery sparks another, and pretty soon you have a whole movement.
So what can our listener do if they're hearing all this and feeling like, man, what can I actually do?
Well, first things first, awareness. Learn about the issues, both in your own community and globally. Read, listen to podcasts, talk to people with different views than your own.
Don't just scroll past the headlines, actually dive deep like we're doing right now.
Right. And then think about how you can use your own skills and passions to make a difference. Maybe it's volunteering. Maybe it's donating to a cause you believe in. Maybe it's just having those tough conversations with people who have different opinions.
Challenging those biases we all have, even the ones we don't realize, are there.
Exactly. It's about getting uncomfortable doing the work, you know?
It's not always easy, that's for sure.
But it's so important. And as Rashad said, true leaders are called by necessity. So what's your call to action? What needs to change in your world? And what are you going to do about it?
Wow, that's a powerful question to end on. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive today. Rashad's story, it really is something else.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, even though our deep dive ends here, the conversation doesn't have to. Keep asking questions, keep learning, keep pushing for a better world.